All right, so let's talk about what are the strengths and common counter-arguments against Unity 2020. So the strengths I'll list first. This is an attractive alternative, honestly, to the corruption and everything else that we were talking about in the DNC versus GOP offers or options. It also is an action plan, the only one I've ever heard of before, and please inform me if I am misinformed of others, that the only plan that I've heard that is actually in its design meant to prevent spoiler effect. We'll talk about the veracity of that in a moment, the effectiveness of that design. Also, apparent equal distribution between party voters has been confirmed in the pollings that Unity 2020 has made of people signing in. So people who've been looking into Unity 2020 have taken a poll, and it's split almost 50-50, it seems, between people who would have voted Trump and people who would have voted Biden. So there seems to be a very strong nonpartisan affiliation with this, that it's not catering to the left or right specifically, but by targeting instead the large audience of people who are dismayed by the current options. It is different from a third-party write-in. In fact, third-party write-in would be a spoiler effect possibility, so that it is avoiding that by demanding, therefore, ballot access directly. It is a potentially great situation in terms of outcome because it seems the most likely one to result in stability in the socio-political sphere, as well as a much-needed demand for leadership. Again, we're thinking about both Trump and Biden as being in their later years, possibly on the brink of death for all we know. That may not be true, but they're certainly up there. Mental conditions don't seem very strong for either of them at this time. There's a lot of reason to see them as the worst possible candidates in terms of leadership for the coming 4 to 8 years. Here are some common critiques that need to be taken into account. The polling stats that are based on members and volunteers is obviously of a certain sample size, and regardless of that size, is of a sample that is of among those who are actually signing up, among those who are actually buying into the plan, or at least looking into it to begin with. So we may be therefore getting a slightly inaccurate portrayal of a wider audience were we to look at the full scope, and so that needs to be taken into account. The timing of this concerns people a lot. Why didn't we do this, in January? Why didn't we start this process a long time ago? Of course, we didn't know who the candidates were yet. This may have been an entirely different story had Yang been the nominee, or had Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, had they become the nominees. It seems that a lot of people would have been much more behind one of them. That said, because we've selected Biden, this has become a very depressing point for a lot of people. So we can at least say the cause for timing has something to do with the nomination. As to whether or not this is the right time versus, say, waiting 4 to 8 years to implement the plan so that we get it going, we have to think in terms of the Brett Weinstein's thought process around this is as an evolutionary beast that we are attempting to overtake. So the evolution of this mechanism that we consider the government and its centralized government and its election procedures has an incredible immune system. And so the idea that we may be vaccinating it by giving it a heads up of an alternative, and therefore preventing the ability to do something at this level and this scope in the future, if only because there will be more drastic measures able to be taken in preparation for the possible upheaval of this system. And it will not necessarily be an upheaval, but it will probably seem like an upheaval to those in the seats of the DNC or GOP. So that is just a quick response to that critique. Timing may only work for such a plan now, as opposed to a future time when the GOP and DNC are not aware yet of what's going on. And a lot of measures are being taken under the radar to make it work better, to help ensure that it works. Whether or not it does or not, and that assurance is only given by the people committed to the plan. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But what are some other things? Two more things that I think are important to take into account. There's the possibility of affecting the resulting number of voters, and this is something I've been particularly concerned about. So there is some logical consistency to thinking that if people are being drawn from both sides and we implement the fail-safe, which we haven't talked much about, but the fail-safe, which says that we're going to pull the plug if we get to a certain point in this running, and we pull the plug when we recognize that it's not going to work. That then all of the voters that have trickled in and wanted to be part of this project can go back to their original positions, voting Trump or voting Biden, however they align, or independently as well. And this is a very nice view of things. However, it seems that it wouldn't necessarily happen that way. It could be just as well that the people who were dismayed to begin with, who were simply voting in order to join in the idea of voting for the lesser evil, to commit to that plan of action, that having found an alternative and gotten very emotionally involved, well, now this might mean that there's not as much incentive anymore to follow through with the original plan, with the original voting choice. So does that mean, therefore, that this would result in a greater number of non-voters? So would we have a worse voter turnout because of something like this? This is a legitimate argument, and I think it's worth entertaining pretty strongly. The thing to keep in mind here too is that the people who will be joining in this effort and trying to make a difference by appealing to people's sense of right and wrong, duopoly versus non-duopoly as the choices may be, that they're going to say, well, again, what does it matter? Regardless of which of these two candidates actually makes it into the office, if Unity 2020 does need to get pulled, that it just may not matter in the end whether or not we had a worser voter turnout or not. Okay, so that's what that ends up looking like. Next up,